Okay, we have all been there. You have a great workout, you're feeling good, and then the next day you can barely get out of a chair. It's a feeling we all know, and everyone has a different remedy, right? Ice baths, heat pads, stretching, you name it. But what does the science actually say? Well, we're about to cut right through all that noise and find out.
So let's just dive right in. If you're sore after a workout, what really works? We're going to put the most popular recovery methods head-to-head based on a huge scientific review to see what actually helps you bounce back. And I'm going to tell you right now, the answer is probably not what you think it is.
But hang on, before we even get to the fixes, we really need to understand the problem. You know that soreness you feel? It isn't just a random sign you had a good workout. It's a very specific physiological response. And yeah, scientists have a name for it.
It's called exercise-induced muscle damage, or IMD for short. Now, I know the word damage sounds a little alarming, but it's not a bad thing. It's actually a necessary step in the process of getting stronger. So, when we're talking about recovery, what we're really talking about is just one simple goal: getting that muscle back to its original, pre-exercise state, ready to go again.
So, what does this EIMD thing actually look like? Well, researchers basically group the symptoms into two big categories. First, you've got impaired function. This is all the stuff you can't do. You feel weaker, you're not as powerful, and your range of motion is all stiff. Then, second, you've got the inflammatory response, and this is what you feel. That's the classic soreness, maybe some swelling you can actually see, and even changes happening inside your body, like certain markers popping up in your blood.
All right, let's bring in our first contender, the one everybody and their brother talks about: cold therapy. This is your classic ice bath, the method loved by pro athletes and weekend warriors alike. But how does it actually work, or does it?
Okay, the core idea here is pretty simple. Cold causes something called vasoconstriction. Fancy word, but all it means is that it tightens up your blood vessels, which reduces the blood flow to that area. The theory is this helps limit swelling and inflammation. It's the total opposite of heat, which, as we'll see, does something called vasodilation. It expands those same vessels.
But here's where the data throws a real curveball. For all its fame, the performance of cold therapy is, well, it's pretty mediocre. In this massive review, it was only found to be beneficial for getting muscle function back in about a third of the studies. And for reducing inflammation, almost the exact same story. It is clearly not the magic bullet everyone seems to think it is.
And this leads to an absolutely crucial point. It's not just that you use cold, it's how you use it. The science actually suggests that jumping into a bath filled with ice cubes might be doing more harm than good. The real sweet spot where the benefits were found is in a much more moderate temperature range. So when it comes to cold therapy, colder is definitely not always better.
Now, let's move on to contender number 2, heat therapy. Think of a classic hot bath or a simple heating pad. It's often kind of overlooked for the much trendier ice bath, but let's see what the data has to say about this old school approach.
And whoa, here is the biggest surprise of this whole showdown. When it comes to getting your muscle function back, your strength, your power, hot water immersion was found to be beneficial in a staggering 83% of studies. Let me say that again, 83%. That means it worked in about 5 out of every 6 studies they looked at. That is more than double the effectiveness of cold therapy. For inflammation, it's about a coin toss. But for getting you back to moving properly, heat is an absolute powerhouse.
Looking at the whole picture, across all the different recovery markers, hot water immersion had a beneficial effect 63% of the time. It is a remarkably consistent and seriously effective performer. So, why does heat work so darn well? Well, it all goes back to that vasodilation we talked about. By expanding your blood vessels, heat ramps up blood flow. It's like opening up a super highway for your muscles. It brings in all the good stuff, oxygen and nutrients for repair, while at the same time hauling away all the metabolic junk that makes you sore. But hey, this isn't just a two-horse race. The review also looked at some lesser-known, but really interesting wildcard therapies that show some very specific promise. First up is contrast therapy. That's when you alternate between hot and cold water. This basically creates this pumping action in your blood vessels, and it seems to be especially good at reducing swelling. Then there's something called hypoxia therapy, which involves temporarily restricting blood flow. I know, it sounds a little intense, but it also shows some really strong results for knocking down both swelling and that next-day soreness.
So, after all that, who's the champion? Who wins the recovery showdown? Is it the dark horse, the surprising effectiveness of heat? Is it the targeted power of one of these wild cards? Or does the popular kit, cold therapy, still have a place on the podium?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting.
Because the researchers came to a really powerful conclusion. You're asking the wrong question.
This right here is the single biggest takeaway from this entire review. The secret isn't what you do, it's how you do it. You know the saying, the dose makes the poison? Well, in this case, the dose makes the medicine. The right temperature for the right amount of time, applied at just the right moment, that's way more important than whether you choose hot, cold, or something else entirely.
So what does this look like in the real world? Here you go. This is your recovery cheat sheet. If you're using cold, you want to aim for that 11 to 15 degrees Celsius sweet spot for about 11 to 15 minutes. If your main goal is getting your muscle function back with heat, make sure that water is over 38 degrees. If you're dealing with swelling, try contrast therapy with quick alternating cycles. See, the key is to match the right dose to whatever your specific recovery goal is.
And all this leads to one final, really thought-provoking idea from the researchers. If a single correctly dosed therapy is this effective, what happens when we start combining them? Could a specific sequence of, say, heat and hypoxia unlock an even greater level of recovery? Well, that's the next frontier, and it just reminds us that we are only just scratching the surface of how to truly optimize human performance.